Hi, Mr. Muya.
Hi.
Can you present yourself?
Yes. Hi everyone. My name is Peter Muya, founder and partner of PTI Consulting. PTI Consulting is a IT consulting firm in Kenya, providing advisory services in IT, mostly around enterprise architecture. Myself, I'm a practitioner of enterprise architecture for the last 10-11 years, having practiced as an employee and currently as a consultant. I also have experience in application development, application support, database administration, project management over the last 20 years. So that's about me, and I'm passionate about the youth in Africa and passing that knowledge to them as part of my legacy.
Great. We meet here in African Development Bank. What is specifically your role as a consultant?
My role at African Development Bank is to help the bank mature its enterprise architecture practice. The bank has been doing the architecture journey for the last 2.5 years, and a lot has been done in the past, but there is a feeling that the practice can move a different level so that it adds value to the business, it adds value to IT, and it matures itself to a level that is a bit better than where it is now. Because digitization, there is a lot of changes, there is a lot of demand on the bank, there is expansion, there is remodeling of the bank's business model, and that has implications on it.
What is EA? Peter?
A common question, one that has been discussed a lot on blogs, on articles by different practitioners, people trying to give it a definition. And it's a difficult one to define because people have their own understanding of what architecture is, people have an understanding of what an enterprise is. There are definitions by different frameworks, by different people, but I want to simplify it in a way that it makes sense to anyone who is listening or watching that may not have that background or deep interaction with architecture. Just before that, I talked about the bank and trying to transform itself as part of the digitization journey. So enterprise architecture is a discipline that simply helps an organization understand the internal complexities so that by understanding the internal complexities, it can be able to position the organization to take opportunities of transformation to transform itself better. It's a bit like repetitive, but if you think about it, there's a quote that says you cannot change what you cannot see. Yeah, and you can't see something if you can't describe it. So architecture somehow helps the organization identify opportunities that it can use to transform. The opportunities could be about digitization, process improvement, structural changes. It's just looking at the business model of the organization and looking at what are the linkages and the association between those parts and how can the organization take the opportunities available to it to be able to change. So it's responding to the external forces, using internal capabilities, guided by a discipline called enterprise architecture.
Great. My second question also refer to enterprise architect is formally or academically, what definition do you give to the concept of EA? Okay, it is a discipline, but what is the role of this discipline?
The role of the discipline is to use a framework. So there are frameworks that are available. They say there are over 900 frameworks and counting that are being used. Some of them notably being TOGAF by the Open Group. The others like Federal Architecture Framework that is used in the US by the Department of Budget. So
Zachman
is there. So
Right.
there are a couple of frameworks. The idea is to use a thought process in which you make decisions with regards to how the architecture should look like. So you use a framework. Now a framework introduces things like standards, tools, best practices, methods, and all that. So those are parts of thought process to do enterprise architecture, and that probably would then speak to the academic aspect of it. So it's a discipline that uses a framework, that uses tools and methods to give, to understand complexity and give advice.
The third question, or the next question, how enterprise architect EA can rationalize my application?
Okay, before we jump into that question, enterprise architecture, the frameworks present the architecture of an enterprise in terms of layers. So you want to have business layer that describes the business itself. You would have the application layer that describes the application. You would have the data layer that describes data architecture, and so forth. So it's a structure, it's a way of organizing the different components of typically how an organization would look like. So your question is focusing on the layer called application architecture. So enterprise architecture looks at many things or brings many things and tries to bring coherence. One component of an enterprise, like let's say an application within applications domain, is very specific. If I'm looking at an application by itself, then that becomes architecture of that particular application. But how can enterprise architecture help in rationalizing or optimizing applications within an enterprise? I think using frameworks, you can be able, first of all, to classify, because as we said, you cannot understand something that you can't describe, or you can't change something you cannot see. So if you have, let's say, 10 or 20 or 50 or hundreds of applications in the organization, how do you know what they do? So you probably have applications that support finance, applications that support HR, applications that do core business, let's say for a bank, it's lending, treasury, and so forth. How do you organize that portfolio in a way that is A, reflective of the business, but number two, manageability of that is better. So that's why we use reference models, for example, Federal Architecture Framework, to cluster the applications in specific domains. So you could create a domain for specifically applications that are focused on lending, applications that are focused maybe on general ledger and so forth. And by doing that, you're able to have traceability of your portfolio. And you can map that back to the business, looking at the lines of business they support, and then you find, where there could be any gaps. For example, there are too many applications probably supporting back office and very little applications supporting the core business. Yeah, that is one aspect. But the other aspects, like for example now the technology of the application itself, how is it structured in terms of, does it have the typical front end, back end, middle tier and so forth. That is part of structuring. So there is a whole lot that architecture can bring in to help organize applications in an organization.
The next question is, how can EA reduce risk in a company, especially an IT company?
Okay. Now, when we talk about risk, we are talking about possibilities of an organization suffering. If they are exposed to those risks, then they suffer. I want to give a story, and I've given this in the past. They say about the Titanic, the ship that sank back in early, I think 1912. it required, when it was being constructed, the construction required 3 million rivets. These are, like bolts to tie the hull together. Now the specification for the rivets had been given by the architect in terms of what the high quality rivets to hold the hull together, because this was a huge ship, a luxury ship, and so it had to have a very strong, connection, how the parts fitted together. Unfortunately, availability of good metal and good people to mold or create these rivets was rare. These guys were in a hurry to take the first cruise, so they had to make quick decisions and opted for inferior rivets, or that were not to the specification. And the ship was put together and it was put to sea. They started the first journey, and that first journey cost millions of lives because they died.
Right.
Yeah. When the investigators, looked at the hull of the ship, they realized that when it hit the iceberg, the impact tore to shreds. The rivets broke like biscuits. So they were that brittle, they were very fragile, they were very inferior, they could not withstand that kind of pressure.
Yes.
And for me, this is the point. When we say you cannot describe what you cannot see, and you have to see something, for you to make a decision about what you need to do, that is the essence of EA, because on one hand, there is a whole lot that an organization can do. There is a whole lot that is changing out there. But changing something because you must change, or rather for the sake of change, can put you in trouble. You need to understand why you are changing. And these are the kind of things that EA brings value in. So we say there is no point of changing today if when I change, if I change now, that compromises my ability to change tomorrow. So say, for example, I need to move to the cloud, but I've not rationalized my cloud strategy properly. So I may succeed in achieving the objective of moving to the cloud today, but probably the agreements I signed and everything and the kind of cloud service provider I move to is not the best strategy for me in the long term. And that hurts I expose myself to risks that I had not foreseen because I was in a hurry to get to the cloud. So EA, by understanding complexity, both for now and looking at the future, is able to minimize those risks. And even where decisions are made with the risks available, the EA is able to provide the implications of those decisions, because EA helps in decision making.
What advice would you give to young people or enterprise that have no EA or no strategy? What advice would you give to those people watching us?
When I started my EA journey, I was working for a telecommunications company. I was a developer. But I had always had this inquisitive and design thinking kind of mind. I needed to do more than just writing software code. So my boss pulled me into a meeting room that had consultants who had come in, and they were helping the organization look at how to integrate systems better. And they started talking about service-oriented architecture, and I got interested. So I saw they were presenting concepts of how systems can be able to interoperate using an enterprise service bus, which is an integration platform. And as they were talking, I got interested in the topic more, and that's how I started reading about enterprise architecture. So it's like an opportunity came, and I kind of moved into that. And for a long time, I had no mentor, I had no one to look up to in terms of to be guided. So it was a lot of trial and error, finding the right material, knowing what courses to do, how to certify, what kind of opportunities to look for in terms of my career, and it has been like that. So for me, I find this an opportunity. Now that I found a footing, I think is an opportunity to provide a bit more structured way for people who aspire to a career in enterprise architecture. And I think it's a fulfilling one. But for you to grow in enterprise architecture, you probably want to practice a bit more on the technical domains. You probably either have tested business analysis, or maybe you have tested application development, but you need to have the passion and the desire to be an architect. Because architecture and engineering, they are not quite the same things. Yeah, there are a couple of differences between them, but they are interdependent. Now,
yes, go.
For the organizations that are considering to or have not yet considered, it's a question of awareness, because architecture exists, whether people call it enterprise architecture or not, it is there. The issue is how mature is it? Just because it's not written on a piece of paper or we don't have diagram doesn't mean architecture doesn't exist. It just means it's not understood. It just means we cannot describe things as we should have. It means when we change, it's very expensive for us. Yeah? So unless you know what you are dealing with or how bad it is hurting you, you will think everything is fine. But when you have a way of determining and rationalizing and knowing that, hey, I've been doing things wrong here, that is the time you actually see the value of EA. So EA exposes problems. EA presents opportunities. EA gives a framework for better decision making. Yeah. And I think in every sphere, the decisions we make today, if we are given an opportunity to make them, let's say a year or two from now, we probably would have learned something and said, I could have done this different. So EA helps in giving an opportunity for us to self-check and relook at how we are making our decisions and whether it's the right decision or not. And this is with respect to all the spheres or all the layers of the organization.
Thank you, Peter. You have 1 minute to talk with people watching this channel. What do you want to say to these people?
I don't know what their interests are. I wish I could hear at least, some of them. But I imagine they are across the different divides. They are probably those who are starting out, probably others already in their careers, others are maybe own businesses and they are interested in how to engage on this. So for the guys with an interest into the field, this field, and they are starting out, keep reading. Have an appetite and desire for learning. Look for materials. There are so many blogs, there are so many the videos of people talking about the subject. Personally, I have my own YouTube channel. If you want to go there, you can hear a bit more about what I say. Then find a place where you can enroll in a course. There are courses around TOGAF framework, which you can start by going to class and learning, or you can do it online. They are available. Aspire to certify, and much more, get connected with people who are in the trade and learn from them. Either as an apprentice, somebody who can be tutored, and learn on the job as you go. So those are opportunities. And volunteer your time, either free of charge or whatever you agree, so that you gain the experience.
Good. Peter, do you give online training about EA?
Not yet, but it's something I'm considering. It's there in the pipeline. More so, the kind of training we have given was mostly off-site. I mean, offline, where you have people in a room and you talk about EA. But online courses is something we are considering. For the other question about people who are, the organization that might want to consider having a formal EA, practice in the organization, I think you have to take it in a pragmatic way. Don't be in a rush. Don't go for a big bang approach. Look for somebody who will help you walk through the journey so that you identify the specific areas of pain that you want to address. Because sometimes it can be overwhelming. You can ask somebody to come and do for you, and they produce a lot of material which leaves you wondering what do you do with it. So if you can get somebody to start a journey with you step by step, so you have the end in mind, but you start implementing or executing it one step at a time. We talk about evolution, not revolution. We don't do big bang, we evolve as time goes along. Thank you.
Thank you, EA.